So this Lunch Bites today is about assessments during remote learning and how instructors are proctoring and delivering these assessments. And I got four different areas to talk about how they do their assessments with remote learning. So let's go ahead and start with Christy Snyder with nursing. Christy?
Good afternoon. Nursing, when we had to go remote last spring, we actually probably had a little bit of advantage because all of our tests were already online and we didn't have to create our online tests. But we were concerned about our testing integrity. And so the nursing faculty got together on both the Chanute and the Ottawa campus. We came together and developed a testing netiquette. And I'm going to pull that up because I do have that we could give to the students. We were concerned because we felt like a lot of them would take advantage of not having to come to class and that they would be at their work location and test. So that was one of the things that we addressed. We addressed with them that they had to be in a private room and that no one else could be in there. We had already been having concerns with testing integrity, so we were really concerned about this, and we were concerned that it would be easier for students to look up information on the computer. So one of the things that we did was we developed our guidelines and we brought them out and we talked to the students about it. And then usually we had 2 or 3 faculty members that would be available for testing day, and we would put students in breakout rooms with each faculty member. And then once the students got there, they had to share their screens. And if they had more than their Zoom window and their MyNeosho coursework window open, they had to close those. One of the things that I had learned even before we went remote was with our testing, it's usually multiple choice and they should just be using the mouse to click. The only time that they would type to put an answer in was with math, and it would just be 1 or 2 or 3 numbers. So if a student is typing a lot on their keyboard, that probably means that they're doing something that they're not supposed to. They're looking up information on Google or whatever. So that was one of the things that we watched for. But we did have them share their screens so that we knew what screens that they actually had open. And if they had extra windows open, they had to close it at that time. They also had to show us their workspace so that we could see that there were no textbooks, nothing on the walls. Their phones they had to show us their phones were off. They had no watches, just like we would do in the regular testing room. We did ask them to have calculators and not use calculators on their computer screens to help them to help us to not think that they're trying to do something they're not supposed to be doing. So they showed us their workspace, they showed us their phones were off. Occasionally we would see kids or pets, but the kiddos were home too, and they would come in and so we just dealt with that. We didn't figure that the kids were able to give them answers to their nursing questions. And once they were testing, once we had everybody share their screen and show their workspace, and once they actually started testing, then one of the things that after the first test that we did was that they asked the faculty turn off our picture on the camera so that the student, so they wouldn't be so interrupted by what we were doing. So we would turn off our picture. We could still see them and watch what they were doing, but they no longer could see us. And everybody was on mute. Occasionally, if they had a problem, they could use the chat feature to chat with us so that we could help them or whatever they needed to do. We did allow them to use scratch paper to write down key points or keywords out of the questions or the answers, and also to do their math. And then when they finished testing, they had to show us their screen again and had to show, or not their screen, but had to show us the scratch paper so that we could make sure that they weren't taking any answers out. It seemed to work really well. We did have some students that had issues with internet problems off of campus, and every once in a while they would get kicked out. And what we decided to do is if they got kicked out, we'd close their test, and then after everyone else was done testing, we would bring them in at a separate time to finish their test. And we could go through, because our tests, they can only do one question at a time and it's only forward progress. And so we could bring them on in one at a time and open up their test to where their last question was and let them finish the test. Because it was not their fault that the internet got kicked off. And it wasn't just students. Sometimes the faculty had problems off campus also with internet.
Yeah, I've lost the share screen multiple times during tests before.
Yeah. We had already stopped doing student test review, letting the students review the test because of some integrity issues. So that wasn't a problem. And what we had started doing was after the faculty had reviewed the test and we saw the areas that the majority of students we missed, we had a document that we sent out to the students that had topics to review about the areas that they had trouble with. We do use ATI for standardized assessments, and they use Proctorio to monitor all the test takers, which is really cool because then it's not, it's being recorded, and if they see anything, then they bring it back to us. So that's really nice. All we had to do was go in as the faculty monitor and allow the students in to take the test, and then watch. Sometimes, for whatever reason, if they get too close to outside of their window or whatever, it'll kick them out. And it's not that they're going to another window. That's the way ATI has always been. Or if they're using ATI's computer on the screen, sometimes it'll kick them out. And so we would be able to let them back in. I think that towards the end of the spring semester and beginning this semester, we have used Zoom to allow the students that are on self-isolation to take the tests. So I think that by the end of the semester, we were feeling more comfortable with it. It seems to have worked pretty well. I really don't feel like, at least from our campus, that we've had an issue with test integrity because unfortunately, there were a lot of students that didn't do well. So I don't think that I think that they were trying to be honorable and not Google or anything to find the answers to their questions. We also put at the beginning of every test an academic honesty statement that they had to read and either initial or mark true or something like that. So that kind of helped promote that idea of academic honesty before they even started the test. And then basically the things that we put in our testing netiquette was what we were already using in our face-to-face, like no jackets, hoodies, scarves, food or water bottles, take off their watches, turn off their phones. And then we did want to see their workspace just to make sure that that we could see that they didn't have anything written down. And they had to show us their blank scratch paper at the beginning so that we could see that it was blank and that they didn't have anything on it. It was, I don't know, if any of my nursing faculty, I feel like it actually, because I think we were ahead of the game because we already had our tests online, and that helped us. Any of my fellow nursing faculty that are on, do you have anything else to add? Oh, here's that. And this is actually, we found several nursing academic honesty statements Nurse Tim, he's a leader in nursing education, and this was actually a resource from one of his workshops. So we kind of took what we wanted and added it. So. Any questions?
I'm just curious if you had any cases where, I guess just the system broke down in some way, like had students who didn't have enough good enough connection to do the Zoom and were far enough away that it was hard to they couldn't necessarily come up in proctoring.
Rarely, actually.
I mean, absolutely.
I did have one student that her computer had got hacked, and she was the one that had the most trouble. And so she ended up going to like her parents to be able to use their computer system, because at her location, because of her computer being hacked, she wasn't able to get into it. I did have a couple of students that lived remotely, and they would go. I had one that went to another student's house,
Sure.
But I made sure they had to be in separate rooms, and I watched them carefully to make sure that there was no voice communication going on. So.
Yep.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
On the Proctorio,
Uh-huh.
was there a cost?
Yes, there is a cost. ATI charges us $5 per student. And then they also, if we're going to do a huge number of testing over Proctorio, there is a fee that they would charge, a one-time fee. But since we were this semester, especially since I'm probably the only one on the Ottawa campus that is using ATI testing, we're just doing the $5 per student.
And the students are paying that?
No, we're paying that.
Not right now, they're not. And to clarify, it's $5 per student per test.
Right.
So, and some of our semesters, we only have 1 or 2 ATI tests. Some of them we have more. But right now, because of the way things fell, we are covering that.
Yeah, I use Proctorio through the textbook I have, and I'm only using what's free on it, which is just you can videotape the student taking the test, and you can lock their browser and a couple other things, but that's all you get for free. And I didn't know if you guys were charging the students or not.
Not at this time.
Okay.
That is one of the things about Genzabar and the online test is there's Respondus on there, but every time we click Respondus so that they can't click outside of the browser, it messes up the test and they can't get into it or whatever. So
It would shut down Zoom too, wouldn't it? If you were trying to proctor it through Zoom?
Probably.
Yeah.
So yeah, we can't use the Respondus on Genzabar. And really Proctorio, now if the students are don't have good Wi-Fi or internet, Proctorio doesn't work real well, but we've not had a problem. There's only been 1 or 2 students that's had a problem with that.
Yeah, I didn't have any problems with any of the students using it. But again, it was just limited to just recording them and locking their browser and a couple other things. But
yeah,
it seemed to work fine for everybody.
Yeah. And it really is, it's pretty easy. ATI requires the faculty to take a little workshop to become certified to proctor for ATI and then to proctor for with Proctorio. And so that was really helpful. It is kind of strange though to not be able to see your students with Proctorio. At first that was kind of like, whoa, this is really weird. But then, we know they're being monitored. So I just have to think, okay, I'm okay not seeing them.
Okay, well,
Any
thank you
other-
so much, Christy.
Okay, thank you. Let me
Um,
stop sharing here.
Okay, if you have any questions for Christy, we can get those to her, or you guys can contact her personally. We're gonna go ahead and move on to Paul now.
Okay.
Floor is yours.
Well, some of my stuff is definitely going to, I have expected it, cross over with Christie's. Especially, I noticed when she put up the netiquette thing. That's something that it's the freest thing you can do for test integrity. I actually was recently at a conference where they had done research on cheating. They talked about their study setup, and it was interesting to me. But they gave an example of a insurance claim form where they simply moved the code of conduct statement from the bottom to the top, and they had less false claims. So that's worth doing. Partly just to remind them, partly just because your idea of what cheating is may differ from their idea of cheating. And it's just good to remind them. As for, I guess I should go over real quick what math does. Rita, Jonah, and I, for the most part, we have online tests for all across, but proctored at one of the testing centers. We of course have to supplement through Zoom when we have students who are isolated. Many times this semester for many different instructors that's happened. I guess the proctoring in the testing center is pretty standard. They will ask us, whether they need to be isolated or not. It kind of depends on the test. The Zoom, a lot of things what Christy says is what we've been doing, making them share their screen, for math, it's kind of important to see their workspace, and for us, we found it difficult enough to write the exams if we, multiple choice, certainly that'll work. And in fact, some of my exams have gone that way. But, in math, of course, there is a great value to seeing their work. So for us, it's gone a lot to even not necessarily having them input something into the test, but turn in their work after the test. And the main thing I've learned for that is if you're going to have them turn in something after the test, you need to make multiple ways. It either has to be super easy for them to do it, or you have to have multiple ways of them doing it. I've made it available for them to turn in work through My Neosho, but also through Remind, which is a communication app we've been using, and through email, of course. And it's just been the nature of the communication that sometimes I've got one piece through one and one piece through another. I have one student that we especially seem to have communication difficulties. It seems it's a random amount of time between when I receive his text. Sometimes it's immediately, sometimes it's a day. So, but that's what we've been doing for our general practice is Zoom supplementing. As far as differences in constructing assessments, we have tried a little beyond multiple choice, but also I find math is so well documented and there are so many powerful tools for working on it that it's hard to make a test that's tool proof. But one of the ways you can do it is make it more open-ended. Like I had an example here of just the last test I was doing. I'll put that up here. This is a problem. The test here. This is a problem. The original version is, no. Are you seeing my Word file? Or are you just seeing my desktop? I hear nobody.
We see your desktop.
Desktop.
So, okay, how about now?
There you go.
Okay. So this is a problem I had on last year's test where I just gave them a function and told them to find a bunch of info about it. This year, I changed it to basically find a function that has these properties, which worked out a lot better for me on this test because of it gave, it gave basically an infinite number of possible answers that are still easily for me to distinguish. Yeah, and it's easier to a lot of mathematical students tend to develop a mechanical mindset anyway. So it's good to give them more open-ended stuff anyway, just to get them thinking. The problem, of course, is if you give something more creative, more open-ended, you often have to give them more time for that. So that's been the challenge. And in some cases, if I've developed enough of these for a particular assessment, I've just done take-home exams. Seem like a better use of the time. I mean, obviously, you don't want to overweigh students with too many things either, but yeah, that's one thing I've done is basically rewriting to be more open-ended. And my test, just looking at my notes here. And I mean, just trying to be as accommodating as you can because of various things in getting students in to test when they're not, in my class, which is, normally in a semester they would test in my class, whereas now they have to find some time out of class. I've just tried to be lenient on when it happens, and as a result, I basically had to write multiple versions of every test, but it's a small price to pay. So, stop my share. Yeah, that's math. Did you want to add anything, Jonah?
Not really. That's what you just said. I mean, everything's okay.
Yeah.
So for proctoring, you use Zoom if you need to proctor, pretty much like what Christy said.
Yeah.
Very good. All right. Does anybody have any questions for Paul or the math department? No? Okay. Oh, Dr. Rob does?
It's just random. I don't know if this is the time for questions or not, so please direct me otherwise if that's preferred.
We were just going to move on to Kyle, but if you
Okay.
have a question.
My question is quick.
Okay.
Paul, you said you have students can submit through email, they can submit through my Neo show, and then what was the third thing? It was a communication what?
Remind.
Oh, Remind. Is that an app?
Yes.
Okay.
It's just because most of them just submit pictures of their written work. So I will take the picture off Remind and sort it in my folder to the correct tests on the computer.
Very good. Just a point of clarification. Thanks very much.
Sure.
All right.
The only advantage I found over using one of those other than just texting is that way students feel like they're getting more privacy because I don't actually have their number. I just connect to them through Remind.
And they don't have your number.
Exactly.
Isn't that correct as well?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. Well, I think we're going to go ahead and move on to Kyle. Floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me share my screen here. All right, you should be seeing a PowerPoint now, correct? All right. I would just add on the Remind note, my son's school uses Remind. I find it pretty slick to get communications, and PDFs work well on that. The instructor sends stuff out frequently that way. It's more text-based, so I think students are more open to that sometimes than email. So I like that approach. I do have these slides. I told Maggie she could send them out afterwards. So if anybody's interested in that, you can shoot me an email or we'll try to make these shareable as well. My experience is a little bit different than Paul or Christie's, a little bit more limited in scope. I've only given 8 placement tests remotely. This last August, we had some requests from international students who weren't able to come to campus in enough time to test and get enrolled. So rather than delay their enrollment and those steps, we looked into a way to get that to them remotely. So my experience is just through AccuPlacer and through AccuPlacer using Zoom. But even though it is kind of limited in scope, I feel like the structure of it and kind of how involved the level of detail is the way that we had to present that hopefully you can take something away from that. But a lot of it is just echoing, I think, what Christy and Paul have also already said. So some of the things that I ran into just in the 8 students working with through Zoom remotely was they were using different technology to access the tests. So that is something that I ran into a number of issues. I also had a language barrier with about half of them, especially when you throw tech terminology into the level of detail there, and then the language barrier. That was interesting, but we were able to work through that. For some of them, they were unfamiliar with Zoom, and then for others, we were navigating time differences too. So all of that said, though, we were able to successfully administer 8 remote tests. So some things just to kind of keep in mind. Oh, missed a slide here. So I think this is what we all think back to circa 2019 when we're giving our face-to-face tests. We're more comfortable usually with that. Students are physically in front of us. We're able to walk throughout the space in 3 dimensions. A lot of times we would give a paper pencil test, so there might not be any tech involved, or if it is in a computer lab on campus, at least they're all on the same type of device. They're all on site, usually have IT support. It's more familiar for students and instructors alike. I think as we get into the end of this semester, kind of like Christy said, we've been working through this process now for a number of months. So I think more people are comfortable using Zoom, but with testing, you have that higher concern for integrity and academic honesty and just a higher stress level in general. So what I would encourage you to do giving a remote test is use the same kind of mindset that I work with students on when we're talking in first year seminar about test taking strategy in general, not just thinking about the test itself in that 1 or 2 hour time period, but what are you doing before the test? How is it set up during the test? And then maybe most importantly, what are you doing after the test to make adjustments? So again, because of a lot of times unfamiliarity with the tech or the variety of tech that people might be accessing from, I think organization and consistency for me in the approach was what made the difference in making it a successful test day. So prior to test day, I really liked Christy's expectations sheet. I would highly encourage you to send out a clear communication to the group of students, whether it's already posted somewhere on your course page or you've sent it at the beginning of the semester. Sending out one clear communication before that test scenario or that test date for that class, and include those expectations, but also include, again, maybe the login and access details. Really just make sure everything's in that one email, that one communication, so that everybody's getting the same message all at once, all at the same time. So login and access details could be like the Zoom link, if it's password protected, to get into the Zoom, time and date. With time and date, be aware that you may have some students that have relocated internationally. So setting up a test at 2 p.m. may mean 2 a.m. So that's something that we had to keep in mind for Zoom AccuPlacer testing. We had a student in France, another one in the Netherlands, one in Canada, and one in Georgia. So all over. So be aware of that. And then include, if there is any way that this student can test the connections, include that in the email. So here's an example. AccuPlacer did a good job of providing for proctors a template to send out. So most of what you see here is unchanged from the template that they provided to us. I just plugged in the NeoShow specific details and the link details for my test, but everything else is pretty much the same. And it also talks about expectations, so what devices you can use, what materials you can have, where you can go before the test to make sure everything works and is downloaded correctly. And then when it's time for your appointment, what you need to be aware of and how to get in. So this I would usually send out 1 or 2 days prior to the remote test. And then before the test, but on the test day, so as they come into the test session on Zoom, I would give instructions. So again, a consistent message. I'll show an example here in a second that AccuPlacer provided as well, is a script. Their script is not the way I would talk. So I would encourage you to rewrite so it sounds less cheesy. And especially for international students, in my case, I kind of got some blank stares. So that's one adjustment that I will make. And if it's not written by you, you tend to stumble over the words a little bit more. So just write a message that you think includes everything that the student needs to know right before they test. For a lot of faculty, I would imagine that you're not going to be as concerned about checking IDs. These are students that you can probably easily recognize. In my case, it did take a little bit more time to start up just because I had never met these people. So more thoroughly checking ID and navigating through some different things takes more time. And then checking surroundings and materials. I think Paul and Christy both said that as well. So here's an example of what this script is like. I think it's kind of long almost, but it does have expectations. So what you can have. What happens, I think an important thing is what happens if they are suspected of cheating? What's your process? Being clear with them so that they know what that looks like in the middle of a test. And then leaving time for them to ask questions before you actually click start. So during the test, AccuPlacer had guidelines that are a little bit different than I think maybe what Christy and Paul had mentioned, and maybe for some different reasons too, good reason. But some of the logistics for AccuPlacer remote testing were we actually put 1 student per breakout room. And what that allowed for was the student to share their screen without others being able to see anything, communication without interruption to others as well. And it allowed for them to keep their mic on so that the proctor could hear their surroundings. And the proctor would remain muted most of the time unless they needed to answer a question or follow up with the student. I like Christy's point too about taking the proctor's picture off, because I did find that they didn't give guidelines for that, but I found that as I would pop into a room, I would grab their attention more if I had my picture on. So I ended up switching to my picture off, and I think that made a difference. It's less distracting to the student. If they're in an individual breakout room, 1 per student, then the proctor can request the remote access to put in a password. So if you're giving individual test and you're worried about that password being shared, then you can put that in yourself still remotely. So I think it really is up to each individual's comfort level with how many students they feel is appropriate per proctor. In our scenario, again, it was 1 proctor per 5 students, and those 5 students each had their individual breakout room. And then we would rotate unannounced on a variable schedule, just popping in and out of those. What I did find doing it that way is a lot of times students would run into issues but not communicate with you. So I'd be in another room just proctoring, checking in on another student, observing for a few minutes, and then I would check in and somebody would be sitting there and say, okay, I've been stuck on this question for 3 minutes and this screen's frozen. So I think as much as you can, just kind of communicating what the process is for that, for them to grab your attention is helpful. And then after the test, just making notes on adjustments that maybe need to be made, any questions that came up from students, issues that you encountered, so that you can implement any changes for the next time to make that process better. Along those same lines, I would encourage a practice test of some kind for the AccuPlacer before we did the remote testing live with students. I practiced on some colleagues, so administered some demo tests to Sally and Kim and Andrew to just walk through the process, and for myself to get a little bit more comfortable with the steps and what those look like. But we did run into a number of problems. So through that, I was able to head some of that off before our first live test. Students, if you can set up a practice test with students, I think that's better, just because they can get that comfort level too before a higher stakes test. Even if it's a 5-minute quiz, or even if it's just let's get everybody logged in and you just have the academic honesty statement on there that they have to click, just so that they have practice with that process, and you do too. And it simulates them using different devices from different locations, probably using different browsers. Again, if you've given several tests already this semester, you've probably already worked through some of that. And then also include the communications piece in your practice too. So if you're doing a practice just with your colleagues, still send out that intro email with all of the details. Still go through the script with the instructions at the beginning of the test, just like you would if you're using it on students. This is just a list of questions that I threw together that I think are helpful to ask yourself, because I think the answers to these questions will help you decide what method or what setup might work best for you. So what platform are you using? Do you need to see the student's screen? Will the test be timed? I found it to be really helpful that AccuPlacer was untimed in my scenario, because again, working especially with international students and language barriers and setup times and technical things that we ran into, had it been timed, I think it would have been pretty rough. So having it untimed, I think allowed them to have some more comfort level working through that. And then again, if you've already been, your students have already been on Zoom, you've been on Zoom, you may already have some answers to some of those questions. And then finally, the last slide here, I think often our minds just naturally want to gravitate to what could go wrong, but these are 3 things that I think are potential benefits of Zoom that I've either observed or think could be helpful. One is students don't have the distraction and anxiety of others in the classroom during or finishing a test, at least not if you have them set up in their individual breakout room scenario. They don't see the shuffling of other students and get distracted by that, or increase their anxiety on that. Also, if you use the breakout room and you're rotating throughout, students don't really have any way of knowing when you'll be in there next. So there's going to kind of head off them trying to game you to a certain extent, whereas if you're in a physical scenario, you can kind of see where the instructor's attention is and have an opportunity to be dishonest. And then the third thing that I found helpful in the Zoom AccuPlacer testing was if a student got an error, I could see their screen. So a lot of times if they're using a proctor elsewhere or taking it unproctored from home, you get that email after the fact that says something went wrong. It's hard to trust that, I know, but being able to see it, a lot of times it's something very simple that we could work through and troubleshoot right there or reset the test. So I found that to be helpful. I think that is it.
Thank you, Kyle. Does anybody have any questions for Kyle? That was some really good information. No?
When you're doing the breakouts in Zoom, this is just something I haven't had this particular experience yet. You can share something in each Zoom. Do they have to reshare it when you pop in again?
They do not.
Okay, so it is a persistent shared screen from the student. Okay.
Yep. So as I popped in and out, I would see their face and their shared screen. They wouldn't have to reshare it.
All right. Well, I think we are ready for Dr. Robb to talk about expectations. I think that's what she said she was going to talk about. So, floor is yours.
Expectations. That's awesome. I love to talk about expectations. So thank you very much. And I'm sure everyone else thanks all of the presenters for sharing your information. This has been really excellent. I'm sorry that I was a little bit late. I didn't get to hear much of Christy's, but from what I did hear, I am extremely proud of all of you that have presented and have worked through these circumstances to try to meet what your students need. In general, what I want to say to get started is that this semester we went to remote teaching for face-to-face classes after Thanksgiving with the expectation all along that the final examination would be achieved remotely for those classes that are face-to-face. And the standard expectation of a final exam has not changed. There is no change in what we have as a standard expectation of the final. And just to remind everybody, College Catalog has a section on final exams, and the language in that catalog section suggests that final exams are considered an important part of each course. All courses are required to hold substantial final exams, and all students are required to take them. All final exams are conducted at such times and places as designated by college officials. Now, the times and places are a little bit off this time around. They're a little bit wonky, but the expectation of a substantial final still exists. And we've had multiple conversations along the way about what it means, what does substantial mean, and that can mean something different to each individual instructor. But in general, a substantial final means a significantly higher proportion of points, for that particular examination than maybe the other exams that you have in your class, whatever that means to you. We also discussed the fact that it doesn't necessarily have to be traditionally what we consider an exam. It could be the culmination of a project. It could be a presentation. It could be any number of things that is substantial and somehow associated with the content of your course. Sometimes people just choose to use the last unit of content for a final exam. Other people choose to be more comprehensive in nature with regard to their final exams. It doesn't, we don't dictate that, but we do dictate the fact that something has to happen at the end of the semester, and it needs to be substantial. And so as we have been preparing this semester to go remote, this training, this just-in-time training, is there to help people who may still have trouble or issues or need suggestions or help with regard to conducting said final exam in a remote environment. So I'm really, really proud of those of you that presented and thankful for this opportunity for the training, and want to highlight some things that I heard. One of the things that I heard multiple times from Paul, multiple times from Kyle, I missed a lot of Christie's, but I'm sure it was there, communication. And that is extremely important with regard to what the students are expecting. This is a change. So they expected one thing, and one thing was true for a good chunk of the semester. Hopefully you were preparing them along the way for the change, for the transition to remote. But with an examination that's substantial, they're going to have a higher anxiety level. They're going to have a higher level of fear associated with how's that going to go. And so the content that Kyle suggested with regard to an introductory email, the communication that Paul suggested, which was multiple lines of communication, all of that stuff is going to be incredibly important for your students from the student's point of view, to be able to be successful at this final exam or any assessment that you're doing at any time in your class. So I just want to kind of emphasize that communication point and reiterate how important that is to students so that they understand what's going to happen. The day of the test, what is it going to look like? What are their expectations? Don't dump that on them in that moment, if that makes sense. If, okay, we're having a remote exam at 2:00 on this day, be there on Zoom. And then once they're there, they find out that they have to have XYZ in place as well. Please let them know ahead of time. Let them know ahead of time so that they're prepared for that. And really beyond that, I'm just here also to answer any additional questions. I do want to let you know that it's on the strategic plan to look into more options with regard to proctoring. And I know that we, as a college, I'm consistently proud of us because of our ability to adapt and to be efficient. So we don't have a lot of money. We don't have a lot of money, and there's just not a lot of money to be had in Neosho County Community College. So we still want integrity. We still want our students to have integrity in their activities that they do, including any remote assessments. And so the opportunities that we have with Zoom, which is something that we already have, that's incredible. I heard Paul say something. He said it was worth it. He had to make different copies of exams and different varieties and versions of exams, and he said it was worth it. And it was. I just want to really applaud that because that's the attitude exactly that makes Neosho County exceptional with regard to our quality of teaching and learning, is that our instructors think it's worth it. You have to take extra steps, sure, but it's worth it because we have a high expectation of integrity and a high expectation of quality. And so thank you, Paul, for saying that and for representing us the way that you do. So communicate with your students. We're looking into other proctoring, but money's tight and there's different ways to do it. So just that's about all I have to say, other than I can answer any questions that anyone has that, you know, requires me to answer.
Okay, not everybody at one time. So
yeah. You know, so many times on Zoom, it's hard because somebody's talking and two people start at the same time. So yeah, let's start. I saw that Jim has a question and maybe Paul unmuted for a question. So let's start with Jim.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering about, you know, that, I don't know if you heard my question with Christy about Proctorio. But, you know, it comes with McGraw-Hill, their Connect software package that I use for homework and testing. So it comes free, but with the free part of it, you only get to record the student taking the test, not any sounds or anybody monitoring it. And it locks down their browser and a couple other things that keeps them from doing on their computer. But, you know, for additional cost, you know, you can get more things done in the proctoring by Proctorio. And so I'm just wondering if is that something I can consider or we can consider to add other things that would then charge students for that?
Yeah, we always can consider all of the options. So what's unfortunate about that circumstance is that that's McGraw-Hill, and not every course at the institution utilizes McGraw-Hill, nor do they use the Connect system from McGraw-Hill. So when we try to come up with solutions for everybody, it's sometimes simpler to use one solution for every circumstance. We may not be able to do that. And in the circumstance that you're in, McGraw-Hill Connect Proctorio might be the best resource for you and your classes, but that is going to be different for Pam in the nursing program in various circumstances, or Paul with math or wherever. And the benefit of one service is that the students all have the same experience no matter what class they're taking. But I totally get it. I understand that there may be resources available for this pocket that's different than this pocket over here. So to consider it, absolutely, Jim, we can consider that. Fees have a couple of extra steps that we want to consider with regard to that, depending upon how much it is and when we are aware of it. So, because our fees change typically in February, but we can change course fees pretty much anytime. But we've already submitted all of that for the spring term, for example. And so to add a fee now for spring is not possible, but we could add a fee now for potentially summer or fall of next year. There's a whole bunch of variables that come into play: time frame, amount, is it worth it, that sort of thing. But absolutely, we can consider it.
And so I just send you the information.
Send it to Luca and me. So send it through your division chair and say, okay, this is what I'd like. This is how much it costs per student, and the details of it, so that we can make informed decisions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I didn't really have a question.
What? That's just fine, Paul. Does anyone else have any questions or thoughts or concerns?
I just want to offer to any faculty that are here or your colleagues, if anyone needs assistance proctoring, if you're choosing to proctor via Zoom and want another person to pop in and out of rooms or just help you, depending on how you're doing it, I would be glad to assist. And I know several other people have offered that as well.
Yeah, that's something that a couple of people had some problems, and I'm proud of people every day, but there's some days that I'm a lot proud of our people, and people lined up and said, I'll help, I can help with that. So if you're in that situation, there's a list of people that are ready to help you, a whole long list, including me. You know how much I would love to be in a test with students. I would love that if I had the time.
Okay. Well, yes, I am also more than happy to help. So just let me know if I can help in any way as well. If you guys don't have any other questions, I just want to take this time to say thank you so much to Christy, Paul, Kyle, and Dr. Rob. We are very lucky to have you guys come talk to us today. I'm going to compile any of the documents used today and also the link to this video and put it in an email and send it out for any of you guys that would like to see it again or reference the materials. And if there's nothing else, I think we're done for the day. Thank you for coming. We appreciate it. Bye.